So we have established that this is a binomial, two terms. Now, they call this, make sure you have this written down at the top of your paper, difference
Would there be an 8 in that answer?
of squares.
I don't see no squares up there.
I don't see any squares either. I do, though.
No, it's not a square. A square is a box.
They call this
That's a
difference
cube, you dingling.
on why they call it a difference of squares. Any
It's
suggestions?
different from square. That's not a square. It's the opposite of a square.
Because 8. What the heck?
8? What about 8?
I have a feeling it's going to be an answer.
Well, there you go. I'm glad you're thinking. What's the other? What's the other different? Why is it saying difference of squares?
Because there's one square in there. One square is 1.
So yes, there is a square in there. Are there multiple squares?
Yes.
I'm telling the Lord.
Yes, it's 2.
M times M gives me M squared. And 8 times 8 gives me 64. So both of those numbers are considered perfect squares. Now, the difference part, where does that come into play? Well, looky there. M squared minus. Minus. That means difference. Okay? So that minus is telling me we're subtracting, so difference. The squares, M squared is a perfect square, and 64 is a perfect square. Now let me explain how to factor this. Okay? It's pretty simple. When you recognize that both these numbers are perfect squares, the only thing you need to do is what's the square root of M squared? Or what? M. Okay. What's the square root of 64? Well, no. I'm just at, what's the perfect square of 64? Don't worry about the negative right now. 8. And the perfect square, the square root of M squared is M. So all you need to do is a plus and a minus.
Technically be 1.
Oh, it's cursing.
They call this an A squared minus B squared. That's what they refer to the rule as. Okay, anytime you have perfect squares and it's subtracting, okay, it is essentially equal to A minus B and A plus B. That's the rule. Make sure you have this written down. Let me explain why we can do this. What would happen if we multiplied M plus 8 times M minus 8? Let's see what happens. Let's distribute it. So let's multiply M times M minus 8. And let's multiply 8 times M minus 8. Okay? So let's distribute it. Let's see what happens when we do this. What's the other way you could multiply this? No? What's the other way we can multiply this out? Aluminum foil. Yes. Okay. So what would happen when we multiply this out? Well, let's see. If I distribute the M here, I'm going to have an M squared minus 8M. And if I distribute out the 8, I'm going to have an 8M minus a 64. Okay? So what happens to these middle terms? Those cancel out, and what are we left with?
M squared minus 64.
Exactly what we started out with.
Then why even do that? Why can't we just keep what we started with and be happy?
Okay? So you can look at that and see why that rule applies to what we started out with. Okay? If you have perfect squares and they're subtracting, well, you can do M plus 8 and M minus 8. A plus B and A minus B. Okay? You don't have to multiply that out at the end. I just wanted to show you how that applies. First off, b squared is a perfect square. 9 is a perfect square. So what's our rule? According to our rule, what's the square root of b squared? What's the square root of 9? So one's a plus, one's a minus. That's it. Is what, you think? Anytime you're factoring. What's our rule when we factored out those trinomials?
Be sure you're factoring.
What's one of the first things we did?
Factor.
You're almost there. Huh? Well, always, 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 try to find a what? Almost. Greatest common factor. Always, always, always. Try to find the greatest common factor when you're factoring anything. Okay? So just by looking at this, what's the greatest common factor? 3 what? Yes. If we factor out a 3b, what's going to be left? Well, I'm going to have a b squared. And I'm also going to have a minus 9. Okay? So always, always, always try to find that greatest common factor. See if there is one. Okay? Now, can we factor out the b squared minus 9?
Yes.
How?
You distribute.
No.
This is pretty.
Can we factor the b squared minus 9?
Yeah,
Why?
because it's B and
It's a difference of squares.
they get free.
We're subtracting, and b squared is a perfect square, and 9 is a perfect square.
3.
So it's really b plus 3 and
3B.
b minus 3. Now this 3b just stays on the outside. Okay?